The moon shines down on a stretch of beach along a remote Japanese island. The waters here run deep just a few feet from the beach, which makes it a perfect training ground for the pilots who will soon be in charge of Japan's latest devastating weapon, the Kamikaze torpedo. By mid-1944, the war in the Pacific was turning for Japan. Humiliating and disastrous defeats across the South Pacific had seen the Japanese fleet utterly decimated. While it still had numerous surface navy, almost all of its carriers had either been destroyed or sunk. The news underwater wasn't much better. Japanese subs were being overwhelmed by mass-produced American destroyers. Every time one was sunk, it seemed like two sprung up in its place weeks later. Now the remaining submarine fleet was ordered to stay close to the relative safety of the innermost Japanese shipping lanes, which were themselves being decimated by American subs. The Japanese Navy, which had briefly ruled the Pacific after the devastating surprise attack of Pearl Harbor, was increasingly becoming an endangered species. The Japanese doctrine of decisive battle had failed them to date, and only now, with its fleets on the ropes, the Navy's realizing this fact. For years, the IJN has sought to decimate the U.S. Navy in one final decisive engagement, reminiscent of past naval battles of the 19th century. However, this is antiquated doctrine by World War II, and the U.S. has brought itself time to rearm and re-equip itself by engaging in a running battle with the IJN, striking quickly and decisively before disengaging. By the start of 1944, the U.S. is no longer disengaging. It is holding its ground and fighting, and without her carrier fleet, the Japanese Navy can no longer win a decisive battle. Desperate times call for desperate measures. A weapon that can reliably sink American ships is desperately needed. But war materials are running short due to incessant attacks on shipping by American subs, and some supply lines are no longer viable due to Allied blockades. Necessity, though, is the mother of invention, and two Japanese naval engineers come up with a desperate but decidedly powerful weapon. The standard torpedo of the age is unguided, and instead are pre-programmed to run at a set depth and course. Initially, torpedoes would skim the surface or run just a few feet below it, striking an enemy vessel dead-on. However, with ever-improving armor for big battleships and cruisers, it was feared the torpedoes would no longer be viable options on these targets. Thus, torpedoes were designed to run under the hull of the ship. Once approaching the underside of the hull, the torpedo's magnetic exploder would detonate, setting off the primary explosive payload. The massive force of the explosion would strike the ship where it was weakest, at her keel. Structural damage would thus doom the ship, or at least heavily damage it and render it mission ineffective. To improve accuracy against moving targets and to allow submarines to fire at targets without needing to fully face them head-on, torpedoes were developed that could be pre-programmed with a target's course, distance, and speed. Then the torpedo could be fired, and the weapon would execute a wide swing toward the estimated intersection point, exploding upon arrival if a ship was there or simply continuing on until it ran out of fuel and sank to the depths. While improvements had been made, torpedoes were still wildly inaccurate, and a better solution had to be found to make the most of Japan's dwindling war materials. Today, with the moon shining down on a formation of 12 young Japanese men, that solution has been found. The assembled men's ages vary from 18 to the early 20s. Some are even younger, having falsified their ages in order to enlist. These are the last of Japan's available military manpower. Most of its veterans have either been wounded too severely to continue serving or lost in battle. Those that survive are far too valuable for this secret mission, but the young men are mostly fresh recruits. Young, willing, dedicated body and mind to the Emperor, and completely expendable. The Emperor protects. On command, the first young man rushes to the breaking surf where a strange craft awaits him. It resembles a torpedo with a length of about 30 feet but has a bubble canopy and a canvas seat inside of it. The makeshift cockpit has very rudimentary controls and no seatbelts or any other form of basic safety equipment. There's no need for it. The young man jumps into the cockpit and closes the canopy, sealing himself inside. The rest of the men help push the manned torpedo into the water, and soon the torpedo has pulled free of the sand. The pilot activates the torpedo's battery-powered propeller, and the entire contraption lurches forward and out to the sea. This is just a training exercise, and each man will take his place inside one of the several training torpedoes. Their goal is to maneuver the torpedo to make a run underneath a small practice vessel sitting at anchor several hundred feet from the shore. Today, the torpedoes contain no explosive charge, but they soon will. The torpedo slips beneath the waves like a small submersible running just a few feet under the water. The controls are rudimentary, though, and the torpedo can be a little difficult to steer properly for the inexperienced pilot. That's fine. In combat, the pilot will need to only make small adjustments. Even a novice skill level is suitable for what will be the first and last mission of each pilot's life. Eventually, the young man steers the torpedo true. As he nears the practice vessel, he presses down a foot pedal meant to force the torpedo to submerge. The torpedo, however, does not respond. These machines have been quickly assembled, and engineering is rough. as is expected of a weapon meant to be used only once. As the torpedo nears the simulated enemy vessel, the pilot desperately kicks down on his pedal, but the torpedo does not respond. A second later, there's a sickening crunch as the torpedo slams straight into the side of the ship. The entire front nose section, where the explosives would be on a real weapon, collapses in on itself. The pilot, with no safety restraints of any kind, is hurled forward and into the controls with the violence of a 45-mile-per-hour wreck. His face is fractured in multiple places and his neck broken on impact. The shattered canopy quickly fills with water, and men aboard the ship frantically begin rescue efforts, only to be stopped by their captain. There is no point. The young man has given his life to the glory of the Emperor. Back on the beach, the instructors give a solemn nod before barking out a command, ordering the next fresh recruit into one of the remaining training torpedoes. Life in Imperial Japan is cheap and easily expended for the Emperor. Those that survive today's training will soon find themselves earning that glory for themselves. Several weeks later, 4 of the recruits find themselves aboard a Japanese submarine. 2 other submarines make for a small wolf pack, and the Japanese are stalking a convoy of American ships. Overhead, a Japanese recon plane has spotted the convoy and maintains visual contact while staying out of range of the escort destroyer's guns, relaying course data to the submarines below the waves. One of the subs speeds forward to drop a dummy mine in the path of the convoy. The lead ship shortly after spots the mine, and the entire convoy changes its course to avoid it, with the USS Underhill moving into position to sink it. After strafing it with its 20mm guns and rifle fire, the Americans realize the mine is a dummy and a diversion. Immediately, the men of the Underhill begin hunting for enemy subs. Prior to the mine being deployed, the sonar operator had made a sonar contact signaling an enemy sub, but in efforts to neutralize the mine, the contact had been lost. Now contact has been re-established, and the Underhill moves straight toward what turns out to be a surface Japanese submarine. The destroyer's engines are given full power as the ship moves to ram the submarine, a common tactic that causes little damage to a destroyer but will split a submarine in half. The Japanese submarine submerges at the last moment, but the captain of the Underhill gives the order to drop depth charges. After dropping 13 charges, oil and debris float to the surface. The Japanese sub has been neutralized. A second sub, however, has moved to avenge the lost boat. Aboard the surviving Japanese submarine, an order is given, and the 2 young men who had been training on a sunny beach together just a few weeks ago spring into action. They crawl down a long metal tube which connects to the kamikaze torpedo named Kaiten. The torpedo is bolted onto the deck of the submarine, and once the pilot crawls into the cockpit, the attaching metal tube is disengaged. These combat-ready models lack the bubble canopy of some of the training models, and so each pilot sits in the dark. Small slits allow them to see somewhat out of the cockpit, but the waters are too deep and murky to see much of anything. A periscope several feet high can be extended and will be the primary way of guiding the torpedo to its target. Suddenly, with a clang, the 2 torpedoes are disengaged from the submarine. The mission is on, and the objective is simple: find and destroy the American vessel. The submarines quickly rush to the surface thanks to their buoyancy, and the electric engines kick on, lurching the suicide weapons forward. The makeshift cockpit groans and creaks with the water pressure, and moisture leaks in from a dozen places. The pilots have to be careful to try and wipe away the moisture from the rudimentary instrument panels and controls, fearing a short that would make the Kaiten completely uncontrollable. Soon, the 2 torpedoes are at the surface, and the pilots use their periscopes to break the cover of the waves above them and take in the surrounding view. Up ahead of them is the American destroyer that sunk one of their submarines, a perfect target that seems to be completely unaware of their presence. Lining up a new course, each torpedo slips a few feet beneath the waves and turns toward the American ship, powering the engine to full speed. Aboard the Underhill, the sonar operator picks up the distinct sound of underwater propellers, too faint to be a submarine but too loud to be regular torpedoes. Confused, he relays this information to the captain, who orders a change of course and a fresh round of depth charges. Deployed from the racks on either side of the hull, depth charges tumble down into the ocean, exploding at various depths below the destroyer. The charges don't need to be accurate, they only need to be close enough for the pressure wave from each explosion to collapse the hull of an enemy sub. The Kaitens are running at full speed toward the Underhill, and each pilot surfaces briefly to get a new fix on the American ship before submerging again. If they're spotted early, the ship's guns would easily blow them to pieces, so the men must run with only occasional glimpses at periscope depth to ensure they remain on course. Nearing the ship, both Kaitens submerge. The Underhill continues to record sonar contacts, and the depth charge barrage intensifies. There is some confusion but little fear. The enemy submarine is now so close that it cannot bring its torpedoes to bear. A fresh barrage of depth charges sink into the ocean, followed by the dull roar of explosions. 24 feet below the ship, the force of the explosions propel the Kaitens upwards unexpectedly. One of the suicide torpedoes suffers fatal structural damage, and after breaking the surface begins to sink almost immediately. The second, however, breaks the surface on the opposite side of the ship, but remains largely operable. The men on the deck of the Underhill can't believe what they're seeing. 2 enemy manned submersibles on either side of the ship. Both are so close that they can't bring any of the destroyer's guns to bear, so the captain makes a fateful decision. The Kaiten can outmaneuver the big ship at this range, so the Underhill must take advantage of the situation before the pilot can recover control of his suicide vessel. The destroyer turns hard to port at flank speed, intending to ram the Kaiten and sink it. The ship strikes the manned torpedo. The move proves to be a miscalculation. The pilot sets off the torpedo's explosives, rocking the big destroyer. The ship is broken in half by the massive explosion at its forward fire room, with the bow being detached and floating away, sticking straight up into the air. 112 of the crew have died in the 2 resulting explosions, and the Underhill is a total loss. What remains floating of her will be sunk by friendly fire, with the surviving crew transferred to other ships. This is a victory for the IJN and for the Emperor, but it's a rather Pyrrhic victory, and the Kaiten suicide torpedo program will go largely to be ineffective, costing the Japanese more in materials and manpower than the Americans they were meant to sink. In total, the Kaiten program would kill about 187 Allied servicemen, with only 2 major kills to its credit, the Underhill and the USS Mississinewa. Meanwhile, the program would cost the Japanese hundreds of lives in failed deployments, training deaths, and losses incurred by the sinking of submarines equipped with the weapons. Instead of helping level the playing field for the Japanese, the Kaiten suicide torpedo program would help ensure its total defeat. Now check out why Japanese soldiers became Texans, or click this other video instead.